Okay, go ahead and bring Mr. Hafen in. Okay, Mr. Hafen, when you arrive up there, we put some water there. If you can help yourself to a glass of water if you'd like, and go ahead and get comfortable. And Mr. Zarnowski, whenever you're ready to go.
Mr. Hafen, just before you left, you indicated that part of the reason you assumed that Mr. Benish did some research in connection with the 2005 transaction is that you were the person who would have reviewed bills that were submitted by Mr. Benish. Is that correct?
I don't believe that's correct. I believe I said that I would often ask Mary to bring me some bills so I could review the billing for Mr. Benish.
Well, do you have a specific recollection of reviewing Mr. Benish's bills with respect to the 2005 transaction to determine whether or not he did this additional research that you're assuming he did?
As I recall, when I reviewed bills, I learned things, conversations that were had between himself, Mike Johnson, Mike Winters regarding different contracts, various things that happened within the district, and this was one of them.
Other than drafting the contract and speaking with Mr. Johnson or Mr. Winters and making a trip to the state engineer's office to review public records, do you know of anything that Mr. Benish did in connection with the 2005 transaction?
Other than presented this contract to the board, yeah, that's it.
That's it? Would you please turn to Exhibit S, please? It's in the big book that's plaintiff's exhibit. Are you there, sir?
I am.
I direct your attention to about the first 10 or so pages in Exhibit S, and those purport to be invoices submitted by the law offices of George Benish to the Virgin Valley Water District relating to work that he has done. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you recognize these as bills that were submitted by Mr. Benish to the Virgin Valley Water District?
Yes.
I'd move for admission, Your Honor.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, they're admitted.
All right, now with respect to, you can see these are heavily redacted. I didn't do the redaction, sir. This was done by Virgin Valley Water District. But I'd like you to look at the entries that are in this bill with respect to Mr. Benish's work. Do you recall reviewing, first of all, the billing for July of 2005 that Mr. Benish submitted to the Virgin Valley Water District?
I looked at several bills. I believe this is one that I looked at.
All right, well, other than, again, if you did review these things, you go through it and I'll let you look at the first 10 pages or so. Is there anywhere that you interpret in 2005 any entry that Mr. Benish made where he's billing the Virgin Valley Water District for anything other than telephone conferences with Mr. Winters or Mr. Johnson, travel to Carson City to the state engineer's office, and or revising or drafting the agreement?
Well, I think, like you said, it all encompasses the agreement. I mean, he prepared water rights deeds for Lanetti agreement. Travel State Water Engineers Office Return Research permit number 22406. So there was, I mean, you can see that there was some considerable hours doing research and conversations based on the transaction.
Do you know anything personally firsthand about the conversations between Mr. Winters and Mr. Benish that are set forth in the billing statements?
I was not involved in the conversation between those guys.
So you don't know if any confidential information was submitted between Mr. Winters and Mr. Benish in connection with the 2005 transaction, right?
Objection calls for speculation.
Well, he either knows or he doesn't know. It's a fair question.
I wasn't sitting there when they had conversation.
All right, and likewise, you don't know whether or not any conversations between Mr. Benish and Mr. Johnson had any confidential communications involved, correct?
I wasn't there when they had their conversation.
So that's correct, right?
Yes.
All right. Now, you were not on the board in 2008, when the 2008 transaction was done, so you would not have reviewed the billing statements for 2008 that are in Exhibit S, would you?
That's correct.
All right. So, there's no indication in the billing statements that you had any conversations with Mr. Benish with respect to the 2005 transaction. Do you recall any conversations you personally had with Mr. Benish regarding the 2005 transaction?
I believe I asked if Mr. Benish was...
Objection, Your Honor. We're starting to get into one of those factors that we're not supposed to get into with respect to what exactly was the communication between the council. The court is, as I understand, the court is not to inquire into what the specific communications were.
Your response to that?
I'm not asking about confidential communications. For all I know, the only thing he ever talked to him about was in front of the board meeting, which I think is probably the accurate answer, which certainly wouldn't be confidential if it's in an open public board meeting.
Your Honor, I don't have any objection to what Mr. Benish may have told Mr. Hafen in a public board meeting. My concern is anything that they may have discussed prior to a board meeting and outside of a public setting. That would be confidential in our opinion.
So what is the nature of the question then? Does it have to do with just general public discussions, or does it have to do with something that might?
No, well, I think my question was, since there's nothing in the billing statement to reflect that Mr. Benish ever spoke with this gentleman respecting 2005 transaction, my question was, did he ever speak with him?
Okay, I think it's a fair question because it's general enough. Mr. Hayden, do you understand that question?
You want to repeat the question?
You understand there's nothing in the billing statement showing that you discussed the 2005 transaction with Mr. Benish, correct?
I understand that. I also understand that when Mr. Benish would come to board meetings, that he was in Mesquite for board meetings, there was conversations that were had. I had conversations with Mr. Benish about contracts that I was going to sign or concerns about contracts, so I did have conversations with Mr. Benish about various contracts.
And all those contracts that you signed, including the contract for the 2005 transaction, are public records, correct?
Objection calls for legal conclusion.
No, I think it's a fair question.
Those contracts were brought before the board to and discussed. There were things that that were talked about that weren't necessarily brought out in the public, but they were approved by the board in a public meeting.
Well, the Virgin Valley Water District Board, whenever there's a quorum of 3 or more members, it must be a noticed public meeting, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So, if Mr. Benish, if there were 3 or more members of the board that met with Mr. Benish to discuss this water rights purchase agreement in 2005, it was in an open meeting, correct?
Discussions, if there were 3 or more members present, that is correct.
Objection, Your Honor. This misstates the law under NRS 241. Communications between 3 or more board members and its council are not.
Okay, I was going to say, it doesn't matter, that doesn't matter to me anyway. I don't care about what the rule is on quorums and all, just the question is, where was it discussed?
Correct.
But there were discussions about contracts that weren't necessarily held in front of the public.
Right. This contract being Exhibit M, this contract was presented to the board in an open board meeting, correct?
That is correct.
And it was discussed in an open board meeting. When I say it was discussed, all of the terms and conditions of this contract were subject to discussion in an open board meeting, correct?
The agreement was there, yeah.
And so you don't maintain that this is a confidential and privileged document, correct?
I maintain that this is a public document. It was between the Virgin Valley Water District and Mr. Linetti. What I will maintain, in my opinion, is that if I'm going to hire someone to represent me, or in this case, the Virgin Valley Water District had Mr. Benish to represent them on transactions, that there were conversations between board members and staff that I consider privileged information
When?
during the proposal that was
Well,
produced here.
Mr. Haven, give me a date.
I don't have a specific date, but I will tell you, in my opinion, when I hire somebody, if I were to hire somebody, I would expect that guy,
All right.
as an attorney, would represent my behalf and my benefit, and in this case, he should have totally and honestly and openly represented the citizens of the Virgin Valley Water District, and so should have Mr. Johnson, Mr. Winters, and should have disclosed all the things that were discussed in here.